The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Valdoria Palace as King Alexander paced in his private study. His jaw was set in a hard line, and his usually calm blue eyes burned with determination. Today would mark the beginning of the end for the Montague family's influence in his kingdom. Queen Isabella sat in her chambers, completely unaware of the storm brewing just floors below. She hummed softly while brushing her long auburn hair, preparing for another day of royal duties. The morning routine she had followed for 15 years felt as natural as breathing. She had no idea this would be her last peaceful morning in the palace. King Alexander's trusted advisor, Lord Edmund Blackwood, stood quietly in the corner of the study, watching his king struggle with a decision that had been months in the making. The evidence against the Montague family was overwhelming, yet Edmund knew the personal cost to his king would be enormous. "Your Majesty," Edmund said carefully, "are you certain this is the path you wish to take? Once we begin, there will be no turning back." Alexander stopped pacing and turned to face his oldest friend. "Edmund, they have stolen from our treasury for years. They have sold state secrets to our enemies. They have used my wife's name to gain power and influence that was never meant to be theirs." His voice grew stronger with each word. "I will not allow them to destroy everything my family has built over centuries." The king moved to his desk and picked up a leather folder thick with documents. Inside were bank statements, coded letters, and testimonies from brave servants who had finally come forward. The Montague family had been clever, using their connection to Queen Isabella to hide their crimes behind a wall of royal protection. "But what about the Queen?" Edmund asked. "She loves her family deeply. This will break her heart." Alexander's expression softened for just a moment. He had loved Isabella since they were teenagers, when she arrived at court as the daughter of a minor noble family. But love could not blind him to justice, and his duty to the kingdom had to come first. "Isabella is innocent in all this," he said firmly. "But her innocence does not excuse her family's crimes. She will understand in time." 3 floors above, Isabella was selecting jewelry for the day when her youngest brother Marcus burst into her chambers without knocking. His face was pale, and his hands were shaking. "Isabella, something is wrong," he gasped, trying to catch his breath. "Father just received an urgent message to come to the throne room immediately. All of us." The guards who delivered it looked different. Serious. Isabella frowned and set down her emerald necklace. "Different how?" They wouldn't look father in the eye. And there were more guards than usual in the hallways. "Something is happening." A chill ran down Isabella's spine, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Perhaps the king has some important announcement to make. You know how formal these things can be." But even as she spoke the words, Isabella felt a growing sense of unease. She had been married to Alexander long enough to know his moods, and he had been distant for weeks. Their conversations at dinner had become shorter, more formal. She had assumed he was simply dealing with the usual pressures of ruling, but now she wondered if something else was troubling him. Marcus shifted nervously from foot to foot. "Isabella, there's something else. I heard 2 servants talking in the kitchen. They stopped when they saw me, but I caught enough. They mentioned investigations and treason." The word hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Isabella felt her legs go weak and had to sit down on her bed. Treason was not a word used lightly in Valdoria. It was a charge that could destroy entire families. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Our family has served the crown faithfully for generations. There must be some mistake." But deep in her heart, Isabella began to remember things that had seemed odd at the time. Her father's mysterious business meetings that always ended when she entered the room. Her older brother Thomas's sudden wealth, which he claimed came from wise investments. Her mother's new jewelry and expensive dresses that seemed far beyond what they should have been able to afford. Down in the throne room, King Alexander took his place on the ancient golden throne that had been used by his family for over 300 years. The room was filled with an unusual tension as guards positioned themselves at every entrance. Lord Blackwood stood to the king's right, holding the folder of evidence. The massive oak doors opened, and the Montague family entered. Isabella's father, Duke Richard Montague, led the way with his head held high. Behind him walked Isabella's mother, Duchess Eleanor, and her three brothers, Thomas, William, and Marcus. They moved with the confidence of people who believed they belonged in this room. "Your Majesty," Duke Richard said with a deep bow, "you asked to see us urgently. How may we serve the crown?" Alexander studied each face carefully before speaking. These people had shared his dinner table countless times. They had celebrated holidays together, attended weddings and funerals as family, but now he saw them for what they truly were: criminals who had used his love for his wife to steal from his people. "Duke Richard Montague." The king's voice echoed through the silent chamber. "You and your family are hereby stripped of all titles, lands and privileges granted by the crown of Valdoria." The words hit the family like a physical blow. Duchess Eleanor gasped and grabbed her husband's arm for support. Thomas's face went bright red with shock and anger. William and Marcus stood frozen, unable to process what they had just heard. "Furthermore," Alexander continued, his voice growing stronger, "you are all banished from this kingdom, effective immediately. You have 1 hour to gather your personal belongings and leave Valdoria forever." Duke Richard's mask of dignity finally cracked. "This is impossible. On what grounds do you make these accusations? We have done nothing wrong." King Alexander nodded to Lord Blackwood, who stepped forward and opened the folder. Bank records showing the theft of over 2 million gold pieces from the royal treasury. Coded correspondence with enemies of the state containing classified military information. Testimony from 12 palace servants detailing bribes and threats. His voice was cold and professional. "Shall I continue?" The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. Duke Richard's shoulders sagged as he realized there would be no escape. No clever explanation that could save them. Thomas, the eldest son, tried one last desperate move. "You cannot do this. Isabella is your wife. These accusations will destroy her reputation as well." For the first time since the proceedings began, Alexander's composure cracked slightly. His love for Isabella was the one weakness in his armor, and Thomas had found it. "My wife is innocent of your crimes," Alexander said, but his voice was quieter now. "She will remain Queen of Valdoria, but your connection to her ends today." The guards began to move forward, and the Montague family realized that their time was up. As they were escorted toward the doors, Duchess Eleanor turned back with tears in her eyes. "What about Isabella?" she called out. "May we at least say goodbye to our daughter?" Alexander closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of what he was about to say. "No. Your daughter died to you the moment you chose greed over loyalty. You will never see her again." The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder, leaving Alexander alone on his throne with the terrible knowledge that the hardest part was yet to come. He still had to tell his wife that her family was gone forever, and that their 15 years of marriage had been built on a foundation of lies and betrayal. In her chambers above, Isabella sat by her window, watching the palace courtyard with growing dread. Something was very wrong, and soon she would discover that her world was about to crumble around her. Isabella paced back and forth across her bedroom, her silk slippers silent against the thick carpet. 2 hours had passed since Marcus had burst into her room with news of the urgent meeting, and still no word had come. The silence was becoming unbearable. A soft knock at her door made her heart leap with hope. "Enter," she called, expecting to see one of her family members with an explanation for the morning's strange events. Instead, King Alexander stepped into the room. His face was pale and drawn, and he moved like a man carrying an enormous burden. Behind him stood Lord Blackwood and 2 palace guards, their presence making the visit feel formal and cold. "Alexander," Isabella said, relief flooding her voice. "I've been worried sick. Marcus said there was some urgent meeting, but no one has told me anything. Where is my family?" The king closed the door behind him and stood there for a long moment, studying his wife's face. In her eyes, he could still see the innocent young woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. What he was about to tell her would destroy that innocence forever. "Isabella, please sit down," he said gently. The formal tone in his voice made her stomach clench with fear. I don't want to sit down. I want to know what's happening. Where are my parents? Where are my brothers? They are gone, Alexander said simply. I have banished them from Valdoria. The words seemed to echo in the silent room. Isabella stared at her husband as if he had spoken in a foreign language. That's not funny, Alexander. Tell me what really happened. I am telling you what really happened. He pulled out the leather folder and set it on her dressing table. Your family has been stealing from the royal treasury for years. They have been selling state secrets to our enemies. They used your name and position to commit crimes against this kingdom. Isabella shook her head violently. No, that's impossible. My family would never do such things. There must be some mistake. Lord Blackwood stepped forward and opened the folder. Your Majesty, the evidence is overwhelming. Bank records, correspondence, witness testimonies. There is no doubt about their guilt. Isabella's hands trembled as she reached for the documents. Her eyes scanned the pages, seeing her father's signature on transfer orders, her brother Thomas's handwriting on letters to foreign agents, bank statements showing mysterious deposits that coincided with missing treasury funds. This can't be real, she whispered. They wouldn't do this to you. To me, to our kingdom. But as she read more, the horrible truth became impossible to deny. Her family had been using her marriage to the king as a shield for their criminal activities. Every royal function they had attended, every state secret they had overheard, every moment of trust they had been given, had been turned into an opportunity for betrayal. How long have you known? She asked, her voice barely audible. I began investigating 3 months ago when our treasury auditors found the first discrepancies. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I acted. Alexander's voice was filled with regret. I hoped I would find evidence that would clear them, but instead I found more crimes than I ever imagined. Isabella sank into her chair. The documents scattered around her like fallen leaves. 3 months, she repeated. You've known for 3 months and said nothing to me. I couldn't risk warning them. If they had known about the investigation, they would have destroyed the evidence and escaped. So you let me live a lie for 3 months. Isabella's voice rose with anger and pain. I planned my mother's birthday celebration. I helped Thomas find a new house. I gave William advice about his marriage. All while you knew they were criminals. Isabella, please understand. Understand? She stood up abruptly, sending papers flying. My husband investigates my family like common criminals and tells me nothing. My family commits treason and tells me nothing. It seems I'm the only one who understands nothing. The anguish in her voice broke Alexander's heart, but he forced himself to remain strong. You understand nothing because you are innocent. If you had known, you would have been torn between loyalty to me and loyalty to them. I couldn't put you in that position. That was my choice to make, Isabella shouted. I am not a child to be protected from difficult truths. I am the Queen of Valdoria. Yes, you are the Queen, Alexander said firmly. And as Queen, your loyalty must be to this kingdom first. Above all else. Even above family. The words cut Isabella like a knife. She had always known that royal marriages required sacrifices. But she had never imagined it would come to this. Her family was gone. Banished forever. And her husband expected her to simply accept it and continue as if nothing had happened. Where did they go? She asked quietly. That is not your concern anymore. They are my family. Of course it's my concern. They were your family, Alexander corrected. Now they are enemies of the state. If you try to contact them or help them in any way, you will be committing treason yourself. The threat hung in the air between them like a sword. Isabella stared at her husband in shock, seeing a side of him she had never witnessed before. This was not the gentle, loving man who had courted her with poetry and flowers. This was the King of Valdoria, cold and absolute in his power. Are you threatening me? She whispered. I am explaining the law to you. The same law that applies to every citizen of this kingdom, including queens. Lord Blackwood cleared his throat. "Your Majesty, there are other matters we must discuss. The palace staff will need to be informed that the Montague family is no longer welcome here. All gifts, letters, and visits must be refused." "The staff already knows," Alexander said. "I've given orders that any attempt by the former Duke and his family to contact anyone in the palace will result in immediate arrest." Isabella felt the walls of her golden cage closing around her. Her family was gone. Her husband had become a stranger, and she was trapped in a palace that suddenly felt more like a prison. "What about their belongings? Their homes? Their servants?" she asked. "Their personal belongings were packed and sent with them. Their properties now belong to the crown. Their servants have been dismissed with compensation." Alexander's voice was businesslike, as if discussing the weather. "You've thought of everything," Isabella said bitterly. "How efficient. I've had 3 months to plan for this day." The casual way he said it made Isabella's anger flare again. "And in all that planning, did you ever consider what this would do to me? Did you think about how I would feel to lose my entire family in one day, for the first time since entering the room?" Alexander's composure cracked. "Of course I thought about you. Do you think this was easy for me? Do you think I enjoyed investigating your family? Every piece of evidence I found felt like a betrayal of our marriage. Then why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you give me a chance to talk to them? To understand why they did it? Why didn't you sides, and why didn't you give me? Because there is no acceptable reason for treason." Alexander's voice thundered through the room. "There is no explanation that would make their crimes forgivable." The guards shifted uncomfortably at the sound of their king shouting. In all their years of service, they had never heard him lose his temper like this. Isabella stood perfectly still, tears streaming down her face. "Get out," she said quietly. "Isabella, get out of my room, all of you, now." Alexander hesitated, wanting to comfort his wife, but knowing that anything he said would only make things worse. "This conversation isn't over. We'll talk again when you've had time to—" "Get out!" Isabella screamed, picking up a crystal vase from her dressing table and hurling it at the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces, much like her life had just done. Alexander, Lord Blackwood, and the guards left quickly, closing the door behind them. In the hallway, they could hear Isabella sobbing, the sound echoing off the marble walls like a ghost's lament. "Give her time," Lord Blackwood said softly. "She'll understand eventually that you had no choice." But Alexander wasn't so sure. As he walked back to his study, he wondered if he had just saved his kingdom at the cost of his marriage. The thought made him feel hollow inside, but he pushed the feeling away. A king's duty was never easy, and personal happiness was a luxury he could not always afford. In her room, Isabella collapsed on her bed, clutching a pillow to her chest. The morning had started with such promise, and now her world lay in ruins around her. Her family was gone, possibly forever, and the man she had loved and trusted for 15 years had proven that his crown mattered more to him than her heart. Outside her window, she could see palace guards at their posts, but now they looked different to her. Were they protecting her, or were they her jailers? She was still Queen of Valdoria. But what did that title mean now that she was completely alone? As the sun set over the palace, Isabella realized that everything she had believed about her life had been a lie. Her family were criminals, her husband was a stranger, and she was trapped in a golden cage with nowhere to run and no one to trust. 3 weeks had passed since the banishment of the Montague family, and the atmosphere in Valdoria Palace had grown thick with tension. Queen Isabella had not left her chambers except for the most formal occasions, and when she did appear, she moved like a shadow of her former self. The palace staff whispered in corridors about the queen's strange behavior. She would spend hours staring out her window, barely touching her food, and refusing to meet with the ladies of the court who had once been her close companions. The vibrant, gracious queen who had charmed foreign diplomats and won the hearts of the common people seemed to have disappeared overnight. King Alexander tried to maintain normal routines, but the strain was showing on his face. The weight of his crown felt heavier than ever, and the empty chair beside him at the royal dinner table served as a constant reminder of what his sense of duty had cost him. Lord Blackwood knocked softly on the door of the king's study and entered to find Alexander standing at his window, looking out at the gardens where Isabella used to walk every morning. "Your Majesty," Lord Blackwood said carefully, "there are matters of state that require your attention. The ambassador from Northland is waiting for an audience, and the treasury reports need your signature." "Has she eaten today?" Alexander asked without turning around. "The Queen's servants report that she had some tea and a small piece of bread this morning." Alexander closed his eyes in frustration. "She's wasting away, Edmund. I can see it in her face, in the way her dresses hang loose on her frame. Perhaps if you spoke to her again." "She won't see me. Every time I request an audience, she claims to be feeling unwell." Alexander finally turned to face his advisor. "She blames me for destroying her family, and perhaps she's right to do so. Your Majesty, you had no choice. The evidence was clear, and your duty to the kingdom." "Don't lecture me about duty," Alexander snapped. "I know what my duty required, but knowing you've done the right thing doesn't make it hurt any less." Down in the palace kitchens, the servants exchanged worried glances as they prepared yet another meal that would likely go uneaten. Sarah, Isabella's personal maid, had been with the Queen since her wedding day and had never seen her mistress in such a state. "It's not natural, the way she just sits and stares," Sarah whispered to the head cook. "Yesterday I found her holding that portrait of her family, just crying and crying. When I tried to take it away, she held onto it so tight, I thought she might break it." "The king should do something," the cook replied. "She's the Queen, not a prisoner. He can't just leave her locked away in her grief." But both women knew that the situation was far more complicated than it appeared. Rumors had begun to spread throughout the kingdom about the Queen's family and their crimes. Some people whispered that Isabella must have known about the treason, that she had been part of the conspiracy all along. These rumors had not yet reached the palace officially, but Alexander's network of spies had brought word that public opinion was turning against his wife. The people of Valdoria were beginning to question whether a queen whose family had betrayed them could ever be truly trusted. In her chambers, Isabella sat at her writing desk, staring at a blank piece of parchment. She had been trying for hours to compose a letter to her mother, despite knowing that sending it would be considered treason. The words wouldn't come because she couldn't decide what to say. How do you write to your mother to ask if she had really stolen money that belonged to hungry children? How do you ask your father if he had truly sold military secrets that could have gotten soldiers killed? How do you tell your brothers that their sister's heart is breaking because she doesn't know what to believe anymore? A soft knock interrupted her thoughts, and Sarah entered with another untouched meal tray to replace. "Your Majesty, you must eat something. You're growing weak." Isabella looked up at her maid with hollow eyes. "Sarah, how long have you served in this palace?" "Nearly 20 years, Your Majesty." "In all that time, have you ever known my family to do anything dishonorable?" Sarah hesitated, her loyalty to the Queen warring with her knowledge of recent events. "Your Majesty, I'm not sure it's my place to say." Quote, "Please, I need someone to tell me the truth. Everyone else either treats me like a criminal or like a fragile doll who can't handle reality." Sarah set down the tray and chose her words carefully. "Your family was always kind to the servants. They never looked down on us the way some nobles do. But—" She paused, clearly struggling with what to say next. "But what?" "There were times when your father would have mysterious visitors who came to the palace at odd hours. And your brother Thomas always seemed to have more money than his position should have provided. The staff noticed these things, but we never spoke of them." Isabella felt her last hope crumbling. If even the servants had noticed something was wrong, then the evidence against her family must be overwhelming. "Thank you for being honest with me," she whispered. After Sarah left, Isabella walked to her window and looked out at the kingdom spread below. Somewhere out there, her family was living in exile, branded as traitors, and here she was, still bearing the title of queen, but feeling more alone than she ever had in her life. That evening, as Isabella sat in her room, she heard commotion in the courtyard below. Voices were shouting, and torchlight flickered against the walls. She pressed her face to the window and saw a crowd of people gathered at the palace gates. The crowd was chanting something, but she couldn't make out the words until they grew louder and more unified. "Traitor Queen! Traitor Queen!" Send her away. Isabella's blood ran cold as she realized the people of Valdoria had turned against her. In their eyes, she was guilty by association, forever tainted by her family's crimes no matter what the truth might be. Alexander appeared in the courtyard with a contingent of guards. Isabella watched as her husband tried to address the crowd, his voice carrying on the night air as he attempted to calm their anger. But the crowd's fury had been building for weeks, fed by rumors and fear. The queen knew nothing of her family's crimes, Alexander shouted. But his words were drowned out by angry voices. She lived with them. She must have known. How can we trust a queen whose own family betrayed us? Send her into exile with the rest of them. Isabella stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. The crowd's hatred felt like a physical force pressing against the glass. These were people she had tried to serve faithfully. People whose children she had held at royal festivals. People whose problems she had tried to solve through charitable works. Now they saw her as an enemy. A sharp knock at her door made her jump. "Enter," she called, expecting Sarah. Instead, Alexander strode into the room, his face dark with anger and concern. Behind him came Lord Blackwood and Captain Morris, the head of the palace guard. "Isabella, we need to talk. Now." "I heard them," she said quietly. "The people want me gone. I won't let that happen. You are innocent, and you will remain Queen of Valdoria." But Captain Morris stepped forward with reluctance. "Your Majesty, the situation is more serious than just an angry crowd. We've received intelligence that some of the noble families are beginning to question the Queen's loyalty. They're asking whether the royal marriage should be dissolved for the good of the kingdom." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. "Some are suggesting it would be the cleanest solution," Lord Blackwood admitted. "It would separate you completely from your family's crimes and allow you to rebuild your life away from court politics." Isabella looked at Alexander, searching his face for some sign of what he was thinking. "Is that what you want? To be rid of me?" "Never," Alexander said firmly. "I will not abandon you because of crimes you didn't commit. But you abandoned my family for crimes they did commit," Isabella said bitterly. The comparison hung in the air between them. Alexander's jaw tightened as he struggled with the parallel she had drawn. "That was different. They chose to betray the kingdom, and I choose to love them despite their flaws. Does that make me a traitor too?" Captain Morris cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Your Majesties, perhaps this discussion would be better held in private. The crowd outside is growing larger, and we may need to consider moving the Queen to a more secure location." "I won't hide from my own people," Isabella said with a flash of her old spirit. "You may not have a choice," Alexander replied. "If this unrest continues to grow, your safety could be at risk." Isabella walked to her window and looked out at the angry crowd one more time. The torches made their faces look demonic in the flickering light, and their chants had grown more violent. "Perhaps they're right," she said quietly. "Perhaps I should leave." "Isabella, no. We'll work through this together." But Isabella was no longer listening to her husband. As she watched the crowd below, she began to understand that her life as Queen of Valdoria was over. Whether she fought for it or not, the trust between her and the people had been broken, and no amount of royal proclamations could repair it. Her family's crimes had poisoned everything she had built in 15 years as queen. Every charitable project she had supported would be questioned. Every friendship she had cultivated would be viewed with suspicion. Every public appearance would be met with hostility. The crowd outside grew louder, and Isabella could see more people joining them every minute. Soon it would not just be common folk, but merchants, minor nobles, and perhaps even members of the court itself. "Leave me," she said suddenly. "Isabella, leave me," she commanded, using the royal voice she had perfected over years of queenship. "All of you. I need time to think." The three men exchanged uncertain glances, but they obeyed their queen. As the door closed behind them, Isabella walked to her jewelry box and removed the crown that had been made especially for her wedding day. She held the delicate golden circlet in her hands, remembering the joy she had felt when Alexander first placed it on her head. Now it felt like a burden too heavy to bear. Outside, the crowd's chants continued. "Traitor Queen! Traitor queen! Isabella set the crown on her dressing table and wondered if tomorrow she would still have the right to wear it, or if the fall of the Montague family would claim one final victim, the Queen of Valdoria herself. The palace guards stood frozen at their posts, uncertain whether they were protecting their queen from the people or protecting the people from a queen they no longer trusted. In the space of just 3 weeks, everything had changed, and no one knew what tomorrow would bring to the troubled kingdom of Valdoria.